Fantastic. Wow. Good to be back with you in our series. And as if you're visiting, we've been doing a series called When We Belong, cultivating community and understanding what it means to do life together as a church, building this kind of fresh culture, hopefully a fresh culture of being seen, known, and valued. And the basis of this is, in our first week, we talked about that God designed us actually for connection. Not just casual contact, but deep, life-giving, belonging, and togetherness. And I think probably it's easy to kind of lose this and forget about this as we go along. And so it's a good reminder for us jumping in here. We've been adding a practice each week for us to lean into. There's something of a connection between when we do something and how it affects who we are, right? Not just think about it, but actually do it. So this isn't just a series about community. It's a journey to become the community that we were created for, and exploring what that looks like. It's a lived practice, not just theoretical knowledge. And as we've journeyed through this series, I've tried to be clear that we're building these practices as we go, so they compound on each other. And so this week might feel like a heavy one if you haven't heard the other three, but you understand where I'm coming from. So we've been going through, we looked at the practice of prioritizing, the practice of synergy, and then the practice of vulnerability. And so the next level deeper we build from there is one that reminded me of a quote this week. And the quote comes from the pseudonym George Eliot, who was a female writer actually. And she once said, interestingly, what do we live for if it is not to make life less difficult for each other? Isn't that interesting? What do we live for if it's not to make life less difficult for each other? You see, within Christian community, once we have entered the depths of what I called last week the village, and I shared that picture of that square in Spain where the families are poking out the windows, the kids are playing soccer, that kind of village understanding of life. As we see and trust and offer vulnerability reciprocally, we enter into somebody else's difficulty, not to pity them, but to lighten their load. And life is ridiculously hard when we don't belong. When we don't have that community or that village or those people who know us enough to step in and to show care and to walk with us in the midst of something. And if there's no mother or loving father figures, those calm, sage-like wisdom of the grandparent, and I was one who grew up with no grandparents around, so there's a big hole there for me of that sagely caring wisdom. But in a village, it's hard to hide. And I remember being away camping once with the family, and about 4 tents down, I think the people in that tent forgot that the fabric walls, and they were having this argument. That's for me, that's a picture of real village life. You're involved in somebody else's world, whether you like it or not. But we can't ignore what is obvious in plain sight, and that is that faith and community require more of the village who care. This is your village. This is our community of care. And so this morning it's the needs of a people who are invested in each other's flourishing and well-being. That's what a village is. We're going to look at a familiar passage this morning, one which, it's easy to just sort of switch off because you know it so well. But I think it's a great passage for helping make sense of this week's practice, and an outline for a model of life together that Jesus gave for all of us when it comes to our practice today. And so we're going to be looking at Luke chapter 10, verses 25 through 37. You know it as the parable of the Good Samaritan. So Paul, if you could follow me along, that'd be great. And it says in this passage, so it's right in Luke chapter 11, there's these moments that Jesus is going through on his journey to Jerusalem, where the Pharisees and others are trying to just kind of pull the rug out under this group of people who are gathering, this new Christian community. And so each of these stories kind of makes sense of the wisdom and grace of God, but also help us to understand something more about what is coming in the way of this Christian hope. And so it reads like this. It says, "And behold, a lawyer stood up in front and put him to the test, Jesus, saying, 'Teacher, what shall I do to inherit eternal life?'" Now, you think that's a pretty plain question, but what he's trying to do there, it's classic rabbinic etiquette, communication technique, where they try to trap the answerer with a question that's trying to be smart and actually not what they want. But Jesus is too smart for them. And he said to them, "What is written in the law? How do you read it?" And he answered, "You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart and all your soul and with all your strength and with all your mind, and your neighbor as yourself." And he said to him, "You have answered correctly. Do this and you will live." But he, the lawyer, desiring to justify himself, and said to Jesus, "And who is my neighbor?" So he's really sort of sneaking in here. Now, you could imagine this is going on in a sort of situation like this, okay? They didn't have these other entertainment factors that we have. They didn't get bored and just start scrolling on their phone. Everybody's leaning in because these two rabbis are having a crack at each other, right? So there's this real interest brewing here. So who is my neighbor? And Jesus replied with a parable, a story that tells truth. He says, "A man was going down from Jerusalem to Jericho, and he fell among robbers, and he stripped him and beat him and departed, leaving him half dead." Now, this is like us talking about Cameron Road, right? Because that road from Jericho to Jerusalem, it's about 27 kilometers. It's still there today, but it goes through a valley with caves. And in these caves, the robbers would hang out there, and in the middle of the night, they would jump out and they would grab people and steal and beat them and take what they want. And it's a kind of a well-known kind of thing. He's putting in their mind something that's very familiar to them, something that they would really understand. Now, by chance, he goes on to say, a priest, who should know better, was going down the road. And when he saw him, he passed by on the other side. Now, when I thought about this, it was kind of one of those things where you've all experienced this, where you've walked along, you saw something, you're like, ooh. Yeah, it's that sort of like, what? Whoa, no, I'm not going to get involved with that, okay? It's that moment, and we can all connect with that in some ways. And Jesus knew that this road and these kind of things were pretty normal. And said, and then he gave another example. So likewise, a Levite, when he came to that place, he saw him and he passed by on the other side of a road. And then it gets really spicy, because Jesus says, but a Samaritan, as he journeyed, came to where he was. Now, to put that again in perspective, it'd be like, and then a Palestinian came upon an Israeli on that road. Okay? Some of you are like, whoa. That's exactly the way that they would read that. A what? A Samaritan. A Samaritan journeyed and came to there, and he saw him and he had compassion. He didn't ignore, he didn't avert his eyes, he had compassion. And so he went to him, he bound his wounds, pouring oil and wine. It's just a way of sanitizing and keeping them until he got further help. And then he set him on his own animal, he took him in his own car, and brought him to an inn and took care of him. And the next day, he took out 2 denarii, which is 2 days' wages, and he gave them to the innkeeper, saying, take care of him, and whatever more you spend, I will repay you when I come back. Which of these 3, Jesus then says to the lawyer, do you think proved to be the neighbor of the man who fell among the robbers? So sharp, eh? Like, what a way to answer. The lawyer said, the one who showed him mercy. He didn't use the word compassion. The one who showed him mercy, and Jesus said his infamous words, you go and do likewise. You go and do likewise. The lived reality of faith is a neighbor who is anyone in need. Not just the worst person you could think of, but anyone in need. About a year or so back, myself and our family, we went to Auckland to see Deb's sister Grace. She lives in South Auckland. We thought, here's a novel idea. Let's catch the train into Sylvia Park in the middle of town. It's a nightmare there, the parking and everything, but it's a novelty. Kids were with us. And so actually, this is what the train station looks like right there. That's Sylvia Park train station. And so we headed along there, and we had our kids and Ephraim, who's Grace's son. And we were coming down those stairs there, those really steep stairs, and there was an elderly lady about 4 or 5 meters in front of us. And she fell from about 4 stairs up, and she just hit the ground. And she tore open her arm. You could see the bone. I mean, it was... She'd smacked herself in the head, and she had a wee grandson with her who was probably only about 4 or 5. And it was just in that moment where we were just like, whoa, and we were up. So we shuffled down there and, tried to help her out. And we had like a jersey we covered one of her arms with, and it was awful. I mean, she was a real mess. Now, what really struck me in that moment, as we kind of rushed to her support, Deb and Grace were aiding her, was the complete indifference of most of the people around her. There's people with headphones on and people who literally just did what a Levite did. Whoa, I've got to be somewhere. And I was just like, what is going on here? It was wild. Those 2 people who had headphones on didn't even bother taking their headphones off. In fact, they averted their gaze. They just looked away and they moved swiftly as possible. And there would have been 10 or 15 people surrounding this dear lady who did absolutely nothing, who instinctively moved away and created distance, deliberately overlooked something staring them right in the face. And we ended up staying with her and helping her out. And the end of the story is she got put in an ambulance, and her grandson, we had to call for her, her daughter to come pick him up. But this is what our world's like. See, in week 4 on our journey into deeper community and belonging, it's all about the practice of compassion. What does compassion look like today for us in our everyday walk, in our everyday life? See, compassion is not just a warm feeling. The word literally means to suffer with someone. It's action-orientated empathy. It's love that moves. And I've been overwhelmed this week watching different communities surround issues and just like lean in and love these people. It's been amazing. And the problem is that in a fractured and divided, radically independent age, I believe compassion has lost its heartbeat. And it's lost it in Christian community as well. Entering into somebody else's world, not to pity them, but to lighten their load, to, as I said last week, one another well, to carry each other's burdens and in this way fulfill the law of Christ, it says in Galatians. John Piper, he says, compassion that doesn't lead to action is not compassion, it's just observation. It's just observation. And how does this come about? Well, it's called the bystander effect. It's a scientifically, sociological, psychological condition that we all have. And Jesus is speaking to it. This person's lying there and there's a bunch of people around and they think, oh, they'll be helped. They'll be helped by someone. Someone will step in here. It doesn't have to be me, and it's a bit of an inconvenience at the moment. I'm trying to catch a train. Someone else will step in. The bystander effect teaches us something pretty sobering. The more people who witness a need, the less likely anyone is actually to help. Isn't that sad? But it's true. It's scientifically true, sadly. In a crowd, responsibility feels spread so thin that no one feels it personally. The bystander intervention. We look around and we assume someone else will act or convince ourselves it must be not urgent. Since no one else is moving, I won't move. Add to that the bent on our own radical individualism, our own personal welfare, our own convenience, our own prejudices that may exist in us based on race or culture, socioeconomic status, because that's what was going on when Jesus attacked them about the Samaritan, right? The one that was hated was there doing the thing that the law said you shouldn't do, and it may be a corpse and you'll become unclean if you touch the corpse. Jesus is challenging that very thing in all of us. Become the very opposite of what Jesus would hope when we ignore it. So N.T. Wright has this really great little comment on this passage. He says, no church, no Christian can remain, can remain content with easy definitions which allow us to watch most of the world lying half dead in the road. It's not okay. It's not Christian. It's not how the church operates. It's not how he desires for us to be. See, in God's kingdom, responsibility isn't diffused. It is personal. It's calling us into that space. Jesus calls each of us to see with his eyes, to step forward in compassion, to be the one who acts in love. How much more so for someone we consider family? We talked about that in the beginning. What does it look like to be the family of God? How do you treat your family? How do you walk with them? I love, and go to Galatians 6 and verse 9, and 9 and 10 say this. They say, let us not become weary of doing good, for in the proper time we will reap a harvest if we do not give up. Verse 10, therefore, as we have opportunity, anytime, let us do good to all people, and then this line, especially to those who belong to the family of believers. Lean in more to the family that is around you. I love that picture. Paul's not mincing his words there, because within community, within the family of God, belonging is about being seen. It's about being seen. I see you, I see your plight, I know who you are. And it's more than just I see what clothes you're wearing or whatever. It's about eye contact. I see you and I can tell in a moment as we talk, as we converse. I don't know if that's just you, but I feel that. I can look someone in the eye and within a second I can tell what's going on. Whether they're anxious, whether they're happy, whether they trust you or they don't. But what we do, a bit like the bystander effect, is we avert our gaze. If I don't catch your eye, then I can ignore you. Then I won't be inconvenienced by having to engage, because when I see what's going on, something changes inside me and I'm lifted out of my moment to actually act. And there's a ton of research on the power of eye contact. One researcher I read this week talked about how a mother's gaze that has centered less and less on their children and more on their phone. This is scientific research, okay? Because holding a baby once upon a time was just this gaze. Now it's this, right? So my eyes are no longer looking here, but over here. Research says that it's creating more unsettled, long-term social and behavioral problems in children. The connection of a gaze. Eye contact. But more than that, our ability to be compassionate and engaged in a situation, the impact on being seen directly correlates, I think, with eye contact. If I can avert that, you won't have to worry. There is this non-verbal exchange, the plea, the heartbreak, the pain that can be felt in a single glance, and just that momentary look. And what I experienced on that platform was just that. People who avoided the gaze. Keep my headphones on and look the other way and walk swiftly. I don't have to be involved. See, empathy has left our insular worlds. And to be in such a moment of distress and not to be seen and to be ignored is one of the most isolating and vulnerable states you can be in. So what does our passage this morning remind us of about compassion as a practice that we build into community and belonging? It reminds us that compassion reflects the character of God. Reflects the character of God. We are created in his image to reflect his grace. And see, in our story this morning, Jesus is wrestling with a scholar of the law while he's also teaching the many listeners gathered. And he's saying, the law is a way of life, but I am the way to life. You're focusing in on what I should and shouldn't do, but actually understanding and knowing me leads to life. And he's saying, actually in the practice, not just in the doing, but in the practice of being the people of God, we are led to the way of life. What he encounters is a community more interested in keeping their prejudicial ritual cleanliness right, but yet missing the very heart of the law. Love God, love your neighbor. So the question becomes, who is my neighbor? And the commentator, Michael Wilcock, he has a great way of explaining this verse. He says, the Samaritan is the one who sees the need of another and having the resources to meet it, does so without prejudice and regardless of circumstance. Who is the Samaritan? Who is the next door neighbor? And I know probably in our modern context, we look at those words that say, and has the resources to meet it. Oh, I'm too poor to help. Being present to someone isn't about your poverty or your richness. Seeing someone and engaging with them and being quiet and walking alongside them isn't about how much you have. See, John 13 has this great little reminder. I'm going back. By this, everyone will know that you are my disciples, if you love one another. It's seen in action toward one another. And throughout Scripture, we get these different pictures. In Psalm 103, gracious and compassionate, slow to anger, abounding in love. That's who God is. That is who we are created in the image of. Colossians 3, therefore, as God's chosen people, holy and dearly loved, clothe yourself with compassion, with kindness, humility, gentleness, and patience. Put it on like a garment, even when you don't feel like it. You know, your mum always used to say, put your jacket on when you go outside. This is what, put the jacket of kindness and compassion on, even when you don't feel like it. It will reap a harvest of righteousness. Because compassion is not optional clothing, it's a part of the uniform of being God's people. Amen? And if you have any, and if you are familiar with Disney and The Mandalorian, anyone watch The Mandalorian? Okay, I see those hands. This is the way. Darren said it, he knows it. As the creed of The Mandalorian, they always look at each other and say, this is the way. As Christians, this is the way. Put on, clothe yourself with compassion. By this you will be known, you shall be known as you are known. Theologian Henry Nouwen once said, compassion asks us to go where it hurts, to enter into the place of pain, to share in brokenness, fear, confusion, and anguish. See, compassion's not sentimentality, it is solidarity. It is God's own heart beating in us. It is his eyes of compassion making contact with someone. And the actual meaning of the word empathy is to feel what the other person is feeling, stepping into their shoes for a moment. Moment of vulnerability for me. If you're aware of Strength Finders, I am empathy number 34 of 34. But the Lord gave me a wife who has empathy number 2 or 3. Here's great. But for me, it is a serious need to step into that space, into that kind space, and to know. It's not that you don't feel, it's that movement won't be natural. So we have to put it on. Something that has changed my heart over the years is my many trips to India. I served on an advisory board of the Loyal Workshop. And my many trips to India, I got to spend time walking the streets. And I remember clearly, this is one that really sits with me. I was walking the burning ghats next to the Hooghly River. And the burning ghats are basically a warehouse full of ovens where they take their loved ones, turn them to ash, and then tip them in the Hooghly. That's holy. And if you're really rich, you're out on the platform, which is only about as big as this, and they get sandalwood and you get to burn them on a pyre. And it's just the most awkward place to be. Anyway, you just feel it in your heart. And you walk along there, and some of the most impoverished people in Kolkata are there. And I remember seeing, it still sits with me, I was talking to Paul, I was like, who do you give to? How do you deal with this need? And I saw this lady, and she was kneeling, and she was playing it was like a harpsichordion, and she was pumping it with her hand. She was completely blind. And she had a rope tied around her, and the rope went over to about where the organ is. And on the end of the rope was a child of about 18 months tied to that rope, so she doesn't lose it. Paul said, give the money to the child if you want to give some money. Those are sorts of things you can't unsee. Those are the kinds of scenes that shape who you are. And in my 5 or so trips over to India, these are the things that have shaped who I am. Compassion is something that we must pay attention to other situations to actually imbibe in our lives. You can't unsee it. You see, Jesus, he clothed himself with a human form to redeem and to restore us. He identified with us in our weakness that he might show what the kingdom of God looks like in real flesh and what it feels like enacting through his church. He put that on. He held that. See, even secular research affirms this kind of thing, that there's a compassionate understanding that lets go of some of the incredible reward centers in our brain. It lowers our stress. As we are compassionate, it deepens our social bonds. In other words, compassion not only reflects God's nature, it rewires us for flourishing. Hence, we need to practice it. We need to lean into it. And as we care and engage and love, our physical being is impacted positively. How cool is God? Which leads to our second insight, that compassion creates community. Where I am seen, where I am loved, where I am valued, there I belong. There I feel drawn in. And you can see it in all the non-Christian things going on around in our community as well, where people are known and seen and belong. As we enter into each other's world, we deepen our social bonds and links us and unites us. It creates that belonging, that meaningful sense. It's the one key ingredient for human flourishing and forms connection and trust. Compassion can also look like simply listening, holding space for someone and being present, an empathetic ear, eye contact. Mark Sayers has a book called A Non-Anxious Presence. We always want to rush in and solve the problem, but actually sometimes people just need you to shut up and sit with them. I've learnt that the hard way many times. See, as a village or a community, I love seeing pockets of this come to life. A young neighbor who mows an elderly neighbor's lawn because they can't anymore. The meal delivered to a young mum who's living on 5 hours sleep a night. Simple acts of love, not heroism, just simple acts of love. Brené Brown, she has this great quote. She says, compassion is not a relationship between a healer and the wounded. It's a relationship between equals. See, when we think about compassion, we always think, I've got to do something to rescue this person. It's not true. Within community, it's reciprocal, right? It's remembering that there go I, but by the grace of God. Compassion levels the ground for everyone. And you move from a rescuer to a fellow sojourner, someone walking the same journey together. At some point, you will need their love, their acceptance, their quiet holding of space for you. See, compassion does that. In community that's shaped by compassion, there are no insiders and outsiders. There's no hierarchy of importance. There's no competition for worth. Because compassion is glue. It binds us together in belonging. We live in a world starving for it. But there are enemies to compassion. One of them is indifference. You see, we're bombarded daily with imagery and news instantaneously. This globalization that happens through technology, the ability to communicate immediately anywhere in the world. I had that this week. I put on my WhatsApp group to my tight three, and I said, hey, I need prayer about something. My mate Andy, who's in Outer Mongolia right now on a mission trip, sends back a prayer to me. Within 10 minutes. Boom. That's the kind of world we live in. But it's also created, because of that instantaneousness, it's also created a numbness, right? Both global matters and even to the matters that are next door. Why? Because we're just so bombarded with imagery, we just sort of cut it out and forget about it. And we can ignore the things that are very close to home. That's what indifference is. It's an enemy of compassion. And there's always the attitude, someone else will suss that out, right? It's someone else's responsibility. We become numb to other people's pain or need. If you can step in, then just do it. Don't let the left hand tell the right hand what you're doing. I know that's a really good giving thing, but actually it's a compassion thing as well. Both the Levite and the priest seemed indifferent and had excuses. The second thing to be careful of, an enemy of compassion, is impatience. See, we generally don't want to go out of our way to be inconvenienced. As I have learnt, sometimes someone just requires your presence to go through it. And our world has made time an enemy instead of a friend. Slow down. Look around. Be moved by compassion. Out of your own timetable, shift. We are what they call a microwave culture. And that has made us irritated and uneasy about anything slow. We've become quite selfish and restless. Put away the phone and make eye contact. John Mark Comer calls it hurry sickness. It will cause us to disregard what is right in front of us for something less important. Number 3, insecurity. Insecurity is an enemy to compassion because it makes us compare ourselves with others and we lose the ability to see them, their need, the thing that's going on. We worry about our needs a lot. We can be so worried about whether we measure up or proving to be superior that everyone else and everything else takes a back seat. We are sojourners, not rescuers, remember. And insecurity triggers comparison. We cannot show compassion or empathize with people's sufferings, failures, and mistakes when pride puts distance between us. Racial prejudice puts distance between us. Things that I remember my grandma, once upon a time, I think I shared this once, she had this absolute hate and distaste for Japanese people, because of the war. But this is what can get into our spirit if we allow it to mature and sit in there. The Samaritan humbly stood in the gap for someone who wouldn't have done the same for them. That's what Jesus' lesson is here. It does not matter who's sitting in front of you. Could be your worst enemy. Compassion says restoration, bringing them back into community is the most healthy space. So, I finish with some practical how-tos. How do we cultivate compassion? One of the most important ones is to see people as Jesus sees them. See, Matthew 39, when Jesus is going to feed the 5,000, Matthew 9:36, it says, he saw the crowds and he was drawn to compassion. Before he did the miracle, he saw the crowd. He saw the thing that was going on. and he had compassion. It's seeing and noticing the heavy and the weary and the burdened, the withdrawn and the lonely around us. Not letting the bystander effect to happen, but intentionally looking toward those who are missed. The overlooked because of their race, maybe it's their demographic, maybe it's their disability. I remember I've got a friend called Manuale. He's got cerebral palsy. And he comes to a whole bunch of things that were youth-related back in the day. And he was sitting there with us, and I was yarning away to him, and his carer who's with him walked away. We're having lunch. And talking about just a glance, he looked at me like, bro, I can't reach my sandwich. Can you help me out? I was like, oh, sure, bro. And gave him, he took a bite of the sandwich, and I wiped his face for him. Now, I don't know how many of you felt comfortable with that. He's a friend. I know him, and I know his needs. But it's one of those moments where someone is going, can you see what's going on here? Can you help me out? Stepping in even when you're like, oh, okay, here we go. That's what it means. Number 2, cultivate compassion by choosing presence over solutions. Sometimes compassion is just, as I say, sitting quietly, bringing a meal, sending a simple text, I'm with you. Step outside your comfort zone and humbly offer what you have and who you are. As I say, I've watched this incredible village of people surround someone this weekend and love on them and make sure that they are going to be okay. It's incredible to watch, and it's incredible for the world to watch as well. Number 3, practice small acts of mercy. It starts by actually acting and in the smallest way. If that compassion's not natural to you, little things. Hold the door for someone. You go, that's it. You start there if you're not used to it. Pay for someone's coffee. Volunteer your time. I don't know. Compassion grows daily through ordinary acts. Allow your heart to be stirred, is what I'm saying. I have a friend who discipled me, and every time we went somewhere in town when I was about 17, we were with him, he's the coolest guy in town. Anyway, we're walking around, and every time we're in town, we went to Macca's, he came out with a meal and gave it to a homeless person. He says, if I'm eating, they've got to eat as well. It just was normal part of who he was. We say, I see you and you are valued. And then lastly, and the band could probably come, is to stretch your circle. Compassion is easiest with friends and those who are close to us. But Jesus pushed compassion outward. He said, to the poor, to the marginalized, even to the enemy. Who is God asking you to notice at the moment? It's a good question to have in the back of your mind. So compassion is not a side virtue, it's at the very heart of Christ. Compassion is it heals not just the one who receives it, but the one who gives. Compassion in our community will not be known, we as a church will not be known for our buildings, our programs, or even our sermons one day. We will be known for our acts of compassion and love towards each other. So let us be a church where no one suffers alone, where burdens are shared and where togetherness reflects the very heart of God. Let's stand for prayer. Lord, our simple prayer today is clothe us in compassion. Make us a people who see, a people who care, and a people who act. And may our compassion be a witness to your love in a hurting world, dying and in need of it. We pray this in Jesus' name.